I live in a very small village, resided by only about 40 to 50 people at most. Everyone knew everyone, and all 12 of us kids knew each other and played with one another. Naturally, some of us grouped together and explored the surrounding area since there wasn't much in the way of entertainment back then in the mid to late 90s in rural Ohio. The village was old. The furthest back I could find about the village, documentation-wise, was that it was established back in the late 1790s as a small trading hub for the local area. Ohio didn't become a state until 1803. Since then, my village has been a part of many legends and stories. One of those stories was about a small fort that was originally French, turned British, and finally colonial America in that area. Nobody really knew where exactly it was located, but there were a few mentions of a small fort in the area from the research I did. One of the stories about this fort was that it was a primary trade route for the local native tribes and the influx of settlers that were arriving in the area. Naturally, conflicts arose as more and more people settled the surrounding area, and eventually all-out conflict ensued between the settlers and the native tribes. The fort was said to have been destroyed by fire. People on both sides slaughtered each other, and eventually the natives were driven from the area with the help of a local militia. My dad always told me that the land wasn't good, tainted and laced with bad energy. I guess when entire families are slaughtered and people are being driven from their homeland, it can cause some long-term ill effects. When all of us kids were playing, we were always told two things. 1. If the woods get quiet, you get quiet and leave immediately. 2. If your name is being called out and you're way out in the woods, do not respond. Go home immediately and never look back. Pretend you never heard it to begin with. In the late 90s, I was around 10 years old when I was overcome with an insatiable desire to go camping. It was mid-August, so hot and muggy during the day but rather mild and cool at night. I gathered 2 of my friends and told them about it, and they both liked the idea. Now, generally nobody really camped in our woods. My parents, along with many others, really didn't like the idea of a group of 10 and 11-year-olds going camping alone. My dad said we could as long as he came with us just to ensure we were safe. I reluctantly agreed. Prior to that night, I went out to scout a good area to make camp at, and I knew of a fairly decent place that was close to the creek, relatively flat, not too difficult to get to. I wanted to scout the area just to ensure it was cleared of debris and ready for tents. By this time, I was well acquainted with the people of the woods, and I made my offering before entering the woods. I didn't see them on my journey or anything, so I felt pretty good about that. Once I arrived at the location, I began moving things around, clearing out the sticks, large stones, and making a fire pit. Even going as far as stocking it with wood and throwing some larger sticks nearby for fuel for later. I was so enthralled in what I was doing and so focused on getting the area clean that by the time I was satisfied with what I had done, I just noticed just how quiet everything around me became. When I say quiet, I mean dead silent. No birds, bugs, not even the wind made a noise amongst the leaf litter. I immediately shut down everything I was doing. I stood there looking around, slowing my breath and just trying to listen for the faintest sound I could. I don't know how long I stood there motionless, a few minutes maybe, and then in the far distance I could hear a crow call. And almost immediately I began hearing the chirping of robins and even a faint whistling from the wind of the trees. The hair on my arms and neck were on end, and I figured maybe it was just me making a ruckus that everything nearby quieted down because of that. Content with that logical reasoning, I began making my way back home to pack up for the night. Around 6 p.m. that night, my 2 friends made their way over with backpacks, tents, and both me and my dad were finishing up dinner. All 4 of us made ready with everything we needed and began trekking out to the site I prepared. Nothing all that noteworthy happened going to the site, even after setting up our tents, lighting the fire, and making s'mores. It was shaping up to be a pretty fun and rather enjoyable night. Once we started to get ready to crawl into our tents for the night around 10 to 11 p.m., the wind started to pick up and my dad said we might be in for some rain, but he didn't seem to have a look of contentment on his face when he said it, which is weird because my dad loved the rain. It was like he felt something was off, and it wasn't long that all of us started to feel that way. We all ended up crawling into our tents anyway since it was night. Impossible rain while trekking home would have sucked. We should have walked back. We situated our tents in a half circle around the fire pit, which were all facing the creek and the back of the tents facing the wood line. My dad was to the left of me in his military surplus tent, me in my cheapo Walmart single-person tent just barely large enough for me, and my 2 friends to the right in their own tents. The wind howled for some time, half an hour to an hour before it calmed down. Then it got quiet. No crickets, no wind, no wildlife. The creek itself, which usually bubbles happily along, sounded mute. All we had was the faint glow of embers from the fire pit in front of our tents cast in a warm glow. I could hear my heart throb in my ears, and I knew my dad and 2 friends were just as anxious as I was, as I could hear them shift uncomfortably. I heard one of my friend's tent zippers, and naturally I undid my zipper to see what was going on. As soon as I popped my head out to look, I saw my dad come out of his tent with the machete he had, and he faced the wood line. My friend had his head poking out too and asked if I heard that noise. I didn't hear anything. My heart was pounding so hard it was tough hearing him even whisper. We both partially got out of the tent to see what my dad was looking at, but all we could see was inky darkness. And then I heard it. A distant and faint hello? It was coming from some ways away in the darkness of the woods. I could see my dad shift uncontrollably on his feet while knuckling his machete looking into the wood line. Then again, the voice called out, hello? It didn't seem right. Off-putting. Almost as if whoever was speaking was trying to speak in a very feminine voice, faint and fragile. My dad directed me to grab some of the extra wood next to his tent and throw it on the fire, which I reluctantly did. Leaving the perceived safety in my tent didn't sit well with me. As the fire began to slowly grow in brightness, my dad stepped backwards near the fire and stood there facing the wood line. By this time, my other friend popped his head out of the tent too, and all three of us, including my dad, were watching the wood line, unsure what to expect. Nothing came out and we didn't hear the voice again. An hour passed, and by this time my dad was sitting on a large stone next to his tent, one leg crossed and a machete in his right hand, watching silently. Only the sound of crackling fire echoing against the shale cliff face across the creek. Several hours passed and both of my friends went back into their tents. Only me and my dad were out. Me tending the fire and my dad watching and waiting. I could hear rustling to our right just beyond the light from the fire in the tree line. My friend closest to it popped his head out, looked at me and asked me, "What?" As if he was wanting me to repeat what I said. I didn't say a word. Hadn't said a word since I came out of my tent the first time. I put my finger up to my lips and motioned to be quiet. By the time I did so, my dad was standing next to me and told us both to shush, and immediately we heard someone say, "Come here?" in the same off-putting feminine voice as earlier. All three of us just stood there peering in the direction of where the voice came from, and shortly after we heard what sounded like something moving back deeper into the woods. It didn't sound heavy. It sounded light, like something lightly trotting back into the woods. That was the last time we heard it. Shortly after, I'm assuming early morning just before daybreak, the wood life returned. Crickets, the distant chirp of birds, and the whisper from the wind through the leaves. Once daybreak came, we all broke down our tents, packed up, and began hiking back home. We were paranoid the entire way back, stopping, listening, looking. We didn't see or hear anything or anyone. Nobody said a word on the way back. Once we made it to my backyard, my dad broke the silence and told us that what we experienced never happened and it would do us good not to say a word to anyone about it. He had fear written all over his face, as if not even he had experienced something like that. To this day, I don't know what it was or who it was. I did end up asking my aunt next door later in life if she experienced something similar since she grew up in the area too. But even so, she was tight-lipped about it, saying we shouldn't have gone camping out there and my dad was a fool for letting us go. I have since left my village and moved out of state, and I have to run into similar stories down here in the southeast with the same reluctance to explain what it was or could be. I wonder what could have happened if we had responded to the voice.